Cigarette?
No smoke. We have gasoline all over the place.
Sorry. Hey, look, Max, you and us, we're just soldiers, right? We don't even know what this war's all about. All we do is we fight and we die, and for what? We don't get anything out of it.
You've probably seen Kelly's Heroes a dozen times. You know the lines, you know the tanks, you know that swagger. But here's what most people don't know. Nearly everything that made this movie great almost never happened. The cast was at war with each other, the production nearly collapsed twice, and the US Army almost pulled the plug entirely. These are the facts they never put in the credits. Number 1. The Yugoslav Army was the stunt team. When director Brian G. Hutton needed tanks, real ones, he couldn't just call a prop house, so he did something almost unthinkable. He negotiated directly with the Yugoslav People's Army. Tito's government rented out actual operational tanks and military hardware to the production, along with real soldiers to crew them. This wasn't a Hollywood recreation of World War II. It was a live military exercise dressed up in period costumes. The arrangement gave the film an authenticity that no studio backlot could match, but it came with serious logistical headaches. The Yugoslav Army had its own chain of command, its own schedule, and its own idea of how things should be done. Coordinating Hollywood's timeline with a functioning military bureaucracy meant constant delays, confusion, and improvisation. Some of those unplanned moments made it straight into the final cut. Number 2. The shoot was almost destroyed by weather and mud. Principal photography took place in Yugoslavia during 1969, and the country did not cooperate. The production was plagued by relentless rain that turned roads into rivers of mud and made moving tanks, already a logistical nightmare, nearly impossible. Crew members recall days when nothing could be filmed at all because equipment sank or vehicles got stuck. The mud wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a genuine threat to the production schedule. Scenes had to be rewritten on the fly, locations were changed at the last minute, and the budget ballooned as the shoot stretched on. What you see in the finished film, gritty, dirty, exhausted-looking soldiers trudging through a war-torn landscape, was not entirely the work of the wardrobe and makeup departments. A lot of that grime was real. Number 3. The production had a military advisor who kept clashing with Hollywood. MGM brought in a technical military advisor to ensure the film had some grounding in reality. The problem was that his definition of reality and Hollywood's definition of entertaining were in constant conflict. The advisor repeatedly flagged scenes as tactically absurd or historically inaccurate, and the filmmakers repeatedly overruled him. The most famous tension point was around the tank sequences. A real armored assault on a fortified town the way Kelly's crew pulls it off would be suicidal in actual combat. The advisor knew it. The director knew it too, and kept the scenes exactly as written. The result is one of cinema's great heist movie dressed as war movie moments, even if every military professional watching it was quietly shaking their head. Number 4. Telly Savalas almost walked off the set. Telly Savalas, who plays the tank commander Sergeant Big Joe, was not an easy man to work with on this picture. By several accounts, he had serious creative differences with director Brian G. Hutton and made his feelings known loudly and regularly. The tension came to a head more than once during filming, with Savalas threatening to leave the production entirely. What kept him there was partly contractual obligation and partly the realization that this was a genuinely great role. Big Joe is one of the most fully realized characters in the film. Tough, funny, morally flexible in exactly the right ways, Savalas eventually settled into the part and delivered a performance that many consider the best in the entire movie. But getting there was, by all accounts, a war within the war. Number 5. Donald Sutherland based Oddball on a real counterculture figure. Donald Sutherland's Oddball, the hippie tank commander who's more philosopher than soldier, is one of the most beloved characters in 1970s war cinema. What most viewers don't know is that Sutherland drew extensively from real counterculture figures he'd been spending time with during the late 1960s. The anti-war movement was at its peak, and Sutherland was deeply embedded in those circles. He brought the speech patterns, the worldview, and even some of the specific phrases straight from people he actually knew. Lines like "always with the negative waves" weren't pulled from the script's original draft. They were shaped through Sutherland's improvisation sessions, drawing on a persona that was entirely contemporary to 1969, not 1944. Oddball is a 1960s hippie accidentally dropped into World War II, and that was completely intentional. Number 6. Clint Eastwood was the anchor that kept the film together. By 1969, Clint Eastwood was already a massive star thanks to the spaghetti westerns and Coogan's Bluff. He came to Kelly's Heroes with enough clout to demand changes and enough professionalism to know when not to. According to crew members, Eastwood was the stabilizing presence on a set that frequently threatened to spiral into chaos. while other cast members argued with the director or clashed with each other. Eastwood stayed focused, showed up prepared, and quietly commanded every scene he was in without needing to make noise about it. His approach to Kelly, laconic, sardonic, driven by a very particular kind of moral calculus, mirrored his own personality in ways that made the performance feel effortless. It wasn't effortless, it was the result of enormous self-discipline. Number 7. Don Rickles was hired specifically to keep morale up. Don Rickles, who plays the scrounger Crap Game, had a reputation at that point primarily as a stand-up comedian and professional insult artist. Hiring him for a war film might have seemed like an odd choice, but the producers had a specific reason. They needed someone who could keep a large, fractious cast and crew from collapsing under the pressure of a brutal location shoot. Rickles did exactly that. His sharp, relentless humor punctured tensions before they could escalate, and his willingness to make himself the butt of jokes as often as he skewered others meant nobody stayed angry for long. Off camera, he was the social glue of the production. On camera, Crap Game became something genuinely special, a character whose cynicism and greed are oddly endearing because Rickles plays the human underneath them. Number 8. The gold heist has a grain of historical truth. The central premise of Kelly's Heroes, that American GIs discovered information about Nazi gold hidden in a French bank and decided to steal it for themselves, sounds like pure Hollywood fantasy. It's not entirely. There were documented cases during World War II of Allied soldiers looting gold, artwork, and valuables from liberated towns and captured German positions. The famous Monuments Men operated specifically because so much looting was happening. Entire units were skimming from supply convoys. The scale of informal wartime theft on all sides was enormous. Kelly's Heroes takes this historical reality and amplifies it into a caper. But the underlying premise, that some soldiers decided the war was also a business opportunity, was not invented in a Hollywood writer's room. Number 9. The Tiger tanks were actually different vehicles entirely. The movie's climactic sequences feature what are presented as fearsome German Tiger tanks, the most feared armored vehicle of World War II. Here's the thing, there were essentially no operational Tiger tanks available in 1969. The ones used in the film were actually American M4 Sherman tanks that had been modified and dressed up with added armor plating and cosmetic changes to make them look vaguely Tiger-like from certain camera angles. Military historians noticed immediately. The proportions were wrong, the track configuration was wrong, and the turret shape was clearly a retrofit. But for general audiences in 1970, it worked well enough. The irony is genuinely rich. The film uses American Sherman tanks, disguised as German Tigers, to be defeated by a crew using a Sherman tank. The props department was essentially staging the same battle twice with the same vehicle. Number 10. The timeline is wildly compressed. Kelly's Heroes takes place over what feels like a few days. A quick decision, a fast drive through enemy territory, a daring bank heist. In reality, the geographic distance the characters cover and the military operations they'd need to avoid or bluff their way through would have taken weeks under actual wartime conditions. The film compresses a journey that would realistically involve dozens of checkpoints, fuel logistics, mechanical breakdowns, and enemy patrols into something that moves at heist movie speed. This was a conscious storytelling choice, not an oversight. The writers understood that war has long periods of grinding boredom, punctuated by violence, and that accurately depicting those logistics would destroy the film's momentum. They were making a caper movie that happened to be set in World War II, not a war movie that happened to have a heist in it. The compression is the genre speaking. Number 11. The German commander's cooperation is more historically resonant than it looks. The film's famous ending involves the German tank commander essentially agreeing to split the gold and let the Americans walk away. It plays as absurdist comedy, two enemies deciding that wealth is more compelling than ideology. But this kind of transaction had real-world echoes. As the war turned decisively against Germany in 1944-45, there were documented cases of German officers negotiating private arrangements with Allied forces, particularly around valuables and their own survival. The scene also reflects something true about the nature of the German military by late 1944. A force that was increasingly fighting for local reasons rather than grand ideological ones. Many German soldiers by this point were simply trying to survive until they could surrender to Americans rather than Soviets. The idea that a German tank commander might prefer a quiet gold transaction to a futile firefight isn't entirely fantastical. It's just dressed up as a punchline. Number 12. The budget spiraled far beyond its original estimate. Kelly's Heroes was greenlit with a production budget that by the standards of the time was already generous. By the time filming wrapped, the actual cost had escalated dramatically. Some estimates suggest the overrun reached 40 to 50% above the original figure. The reasons were multiple. The Yugoslav location was more expensive to work in than anticipated. The weather cost weeks of shooting time, and the sheer complexity of coordinating military hardware required constant improvisation and renegotiation. MGM, which was going through its own serious financial troubles at the time, was not pleased. The studio was simultaneously dealing with the failures of several expensive productions and had been hoping Kelly's Heroes would be a relatively straightforward commercial picture. Instead, it became one of the most complex location shoots the studio had managed in years. The film needed to perform well at the box office just to break even, which created its own pressures around marketing and release strategy. Number 13. Real explosions were used far more than safety protocols would allow today. The action sequences in Kelly's Heroes involved real explosive charges, real fire, and real concussive blasts at distances that would be considered unsafe by modern film production standards. Several crew members were treated for minor injuries during filming. The pyrotechnics team operated with a level of latitude that contemporary safety regulations have long since eliminated. The result is that the battle sequences have a physical reality that's very difficult to fake. When you see soldiers diving away from explosions in this film, they are often diving away from actual explosions. The instinctive, full-body reactions of the actors in these sequences are not always performance. They're genuine reflexes. It's part of why the action in Kelly's Heroes still holds up visually in ways that overproduced sequences from the same era can't match. Number 14. The tank interiors were filmed in specially built studio sets. Despite using real tanks for the exterior and driving sequences, the interior shots, the cramped, claustrophobic scenes inside Oddball's tank with the crew, were filmed on specially constructed studio sets. The actual interiors of the M4 Shermans used in Yugoslavia were too small and too loud to film in practically, and the lighting conditions inside a working tank are essentially impossible for a camera crew. The production built detailed replicas of tank interiors on a soundstage, giving the camera freedom to move and giving the sound department control over what the audience could hear. This split approach, real exteriors, studio interiors, was common practice in the era but required careful continuity work to make sure the two environments matched. Watch the film carefully and you can sometimes see the slight difference in the quality of light between the exterior action shots and the interior dialogue scenes. Number 15. The Tiger tank reveal was designed as a pure movie moment. The scene where Kelly's crew finally encounters the German Tiger tanks guarding the bank is constructed with great deliberate care. Director Hutton slows the film's pace dramatically, uses low angles to make the tanks look enormous, and holds on reaction shots of the Americans before giving the audience a full look at the threat they're facing. It's pure cinematic language, the reveal of the monster before the final confrontation. What makes this interesting in retrospect is that the monsters are, as noted earlier, dressed-up Shermans. The entire visual impact of the scene is manufactured through camera placement, editing rhythm, and performance, rather than through the actual menace of the vehicles themselves. It's a small masterclass in how cinema creates scale and threat through technique rather than production budget, and it works completely even when you know the trick. Number 16. Negative waves was almost cut from the script. Oddball's recurring complaint about negative waves, his philosophical objection to pessimism in the face of impossible odds, is now one of the most quoted lines from the entire film. It wasn't in the original draft of the script. It emerged from Donald Sutherland's improvisations during rehearsal and early shooting, and there was genuine debate among the producers about whether it was too strange, too comedic, and too disconnected from the war movie tone they were trying to maintain. The decision to keep it and to let Sutherland build a whole character philosophy around it turned out to be one of the best creative choices the production made. The phrase captured something about the counterculture moment of 1969 in a way that no straight dramatic line could have. 50+ years later, people who have never seen the film still use the phrase without knowing where it came from. That's the mark of a line that genuinely entered the language. Number 17. The final standoff scene was rewritten multiple times. The climactic standoff between Kelly's crew and the German tank commander went through at least 4 distinct versions before the one that ended up on screen. Early drafts were more violent. There was a version where the confrontation turned into a firefight before the gold agreement was reached, and another where one of the main American characters was killed. The producers kept pulling back from those endings because they undermined the film's essential tone. Kelly's Heroes is fundamentally a dark comedy about greed, and a tragic ending would have made a different kind of statement about war than the film was actually interested in making. The final version, which plays the standoff almost entirely for absurdist laughs while somehow maintaining genuine tension, is the result of writers and producers understanding what kind of movie they were actually making and committing to it completely. Number 18. Several of the film's funniest lines were ad-libbed under pressure. The compressed production schedule and the chaotic location conditions meant that actors frequently had to work without the luxury of multiple takes and careful preparation. Some of the film's most memorable comedic moments were born directly from necessity. An actor reaching for something real because the scripted line wasn't landing, or a genuine reaction to something unexpected on set that the director chose to keep. Don Rickles in particular had a well-documented habit of departing from the script whenever he sensed a better joke nearby. Director Hutton, to his credit, was experienced enough to recognize when an improvised moment was an improvement and smart enough to leave the camera running. The result is that Kelly's Heroes has a looser, more spontaneous energy in its comedic scenes than most big-budget studio productions of the era, which tended toward careful, precise execution of written material. Number 19. The film was largely dismissed by critics in 1970. When Kelly's Heroes opened in June 1970, the critical reception was mixed to negative. Most serious film critics found it too long, too unfocused, and tonally confused, uncertain whether it wanted to be a war movie, a comedy, or a caper film. Several reviews specifically criticized the oddball character as an anachronistic intrusion of 1960s counterculture into a World War II setting. Those criticisms were not entirely wrong, but they missed something important about what the film was doing deliberately. The anachronisms weren't failures of research, they were the point. Kelly's Heroes is a Vietnam-era movie about World War II, using the earlier war to comment on the one that was actually happening. The hippie in the tank, the soldiers treating combat as a business opportunity, the complete absence of patriotic motivation, all of that was intentional. Critics in 1970 were judging a satire as if it were a straight war film. Number 20, it found its true audience on television. Like several films of its era that were underappreciated on initial release, Kelly's Heroes found its real audience not in theaters but through television broadcasts in the mid to late 1970s. Before cable, before home video, network, and local TV were how most Americans actually experienced movies, and the film played extremely well on the small screen. Its relatively contained locations and dialogue-heavy sequences translated effectively, and late-night and weekend broadcasts introduced it to audiences who had missed or skipped it in theaters. By the early 1980s, Kelly's Heroes had developed the cult following that it still maintains. The home video era then cemented that reputation, allowing viewers to watch it repeatedly, quote it, and spread it person to person in the way that creates lasting cultural attachment. The film that critics dismissed in 1970 became a genuine classic through the slow accumulation of devotion from people who recognized something in it that the reviews had failed to see. Number 21. The film's anti-war message was hidden in plain sight. At the height of American involvement in Vietnam, Kelly's Heroes made a film about World War II, the good war, the one nobody argued about, and systematically stripped it of every honorable motivation. Kelly doesn't fight for freedom. He fights for gold. His crew doesn't liberate anything. They rob it. The generals back at headquarters are more concerned with their own advancement than with what's actually happening on the ground. Military bureaucracy is portrayed as the main obstacle to getting anything done. This is a profoundly anti-war film wearing the costume of a fun heist movie. None of the usual justifications for combat survive contact with Kelly's actual story. The mission is larceny. The heroism is self-interest. The enemy turns out to be a reasonable businessman once you find the right language to speak with him. For audiences in 1970 watching their country struggle to explain why young men were dying in Southeast Asia, this subtext was not subtle. It just wasn't in the advertising. Here's what gets you. This movie came out in 1970, right in the middle of Vietnam, and every single thing about it was a message that the studio probably hoped nobody would notice too loudly. Clint Eastwood leading a crew of misfits through enemy territory not for country, not for duty, but for $14 million in Nazi gold. They got away with it because they called it a comedy. Next time you watch Kelly's Heroes, you're not just watching a great war film. You're watching one of Hollywood's most perfectly disguised anti-war statements ever made. And if that's not worth a rewatch, well, there you go with those negative waves again. What's your favorite moment from the film? Drop it in the comments, and if this one hit different, you know what to do.